Hey guys, welcome to That Florida Feeling. How is everybody this week? I hope it's been a good week. Happy St. Patrick's Day. Hope you wore green. Thank you to everybody who's interacted with the Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok pages. As always, you guys are awesome. I want you guys to know that I really appreciate you. I know that we just kind of did a check-in this week to see how everybody's doing, and I know it's kind of been some hard times, and I know you're not, we all kind of go through them, so I'm here for you if you need to just say hi, if you want to talk, if you want to, just chat, whatever. I'm here. I've got you guys. I know how it feels to have the hard days, so just know you're not alone and that I am glad each and every one of you are here. Thank you for helping make this podcast successful. Thank you to everybody who listened last week. I hope you guys enjoyed the episode. I've had a lot of suggestions recently. I am trying to get to all of them. I will say most are suggestions that I didn't even think to do, so thank you so much for those. Florida has so many interesting places, people, and history. There's absolutely no shortage of topics. It's just sometimes when you sit down and write the podcast episode, your mind goes blank. So thank you to those who've helped me. This is actually one that was suggested to me, and it was more true crime. So today we're going to kind of talk about true crime. Actually, more specifically, kind of the underbelly of Tampa. And even more specific than that, the Trafficante crime family. The Trafficante crime family is also known as the Tampa Mafia. It's an Italian-American mafia crime family that was based in Tampa, and their most notable boss was actually Santo Trafficante Jr., and he ruled Tampa with an iron fist. And I'm not going to lie to you, when you think of Tampa, you don't think of the mafia. Miami? Yeah, sure. Miami has mafia, cartels, gangs, everything else, but Tampa? And I know what they say, in every big city there's some seedy spots and other things, and Tampa's no exception to this, and that is the Trafficante family. Although it wasn't just the Trafficante family. The actual beginnings to Tampa's underworld actually started in the early 1920s when a man named Charlie Wall created an organized crime syndicate in the Cigar City. If this name sounds familiar to you, I did talk about part of this when I did the Tampa episode. Probably, I think it was December of 2021, I think. I get my episodes mixed up, but I know I did a Tampa episode, and I know I talked about Ybor City, and I know that this name came up, so if it sounds familiar, that's where it's from. But in the early 1920s, Charlie Wall created an organized crime syndicate in the Cigar City. He controlled a large number of illegal gambling rackets and had many Tampa politicians in his pockets, thanks to some hefty bribes. Everybody has a price, right? Now, Wall was mainly in Ybor City, and he employed Italians, Cubans, and other ethnicities in his organization. Again, I talked about this, and Charlie Wall really did control not just Tampa and Ybor, but kind of like the whole, he had a wide area that he controlled, because he didn't really have any competition. His actually only competition being the Italian mafia boss, Ignacio Antinori. Now, Antinori was a Sicilian-born immigrant who became well-known as a drug kingpin and an Italian crime boss during the 1920s, and he ended up controlling his part of the city. But, of course, he had competition from not just Wall, but a smaller Italian gang that had just gotten started and was run by Santo Trafficante Sr. Alright, so I'm going to refer to Santo Trafficante Sr. as the Senior Trafficante because we're also going to talk about the Junior one. Just want to go and establish that. The Senior Trafficante had been in Tampa since the age of 18. He had set up bolita games throughout the city, and that really actually gave him a powerful hold on certain parts, especially in Ybor. Now you're probably like, what is bolita? Bolita is a type of lottery that was popular in the late 1800s to early 1900s, and it was really started in Cuba. But it did come over to Florida, and it was really popular among the Hispanics, Italians, and black working classes. The basic game had 100 numbered balls placed in a bag and drawn out, and they would place bets on which ball would be drawn next. Now, Antinori had taken note of Trafficante Sr. and invited him into his organization. He figured have him in the organization rather than fight against him, which was probably smart on his part. The partnership meant that they were able to expand the bolita games from just Tampa to all across the state, making them both very powerful and very wealthy. The 1930s actually brought the era of blood to Tampa. Antinori and Wall were in a decade-long war for the city, and that war meant that no one was off limits. Evaristo Tito Rubio, who was Wall's closest associate, was actually shot on his front porch on March 8th, 1938. And of course, that just pissed Wall off. And the war continued for almost 2 more years until October 24th, 1940, when Ignacio Antinori was shot and killed by a shotgun blast to the head at the Palm Garden Inn in Tampa. In 1943, Antinori's sons, Paul and Joseph, were actually convicted in Kansas City of drug dealing and sentenced to 4 years in prison. And that actually is what officially brought the end to that decade-long war. Now, of course, the war had weakened Wall and Antinori's organizations even past when he was shot. And it was to the point where it really only left Trafficante Sr. as the most powerful person in that, part of the city at that time. And Trafficante Sr. was in the perfect position to take over. And he did. And he was actually one of the last and most powerful bosses in Tampa during that time. Trafficante Sr. had taken over the organization and its criminal activities in a majority of the city. He also brought his son, Santo Trafficante Jr., so now that we are really going to be calling him Senior and Junior, into the organization to begin teaching them how to run everything. He wanted his son to know it all. And Trafficante Sr. had always portrayed him as a successful Tampa city factory owner because he was closely watched by the police, so he knew he had to have a legitimate business. He also made Salvatore Red Italiano the acting boss to keep the heat off of him from the cops. The pressure became too much, though, when Wall began to testify in the 1950s about the activities of both Trafficantes, and they had to flee to Cuba. Just because they left Florida doesn't mean they'd given up. They wanted to make it in Havana, so it gave them time to operate mob-operated casinos, as well as keep an eye on their Florida investments. So they still had their hold in Tampa during this time, and actually they made some money, but majority of their money during this 1950s time when they were in Cuba actually came from Cuba, from those casinos that they operated. But all that money allowed them to continue to run Florida. Now, the family eventually did return to Tampa after the hearings were over, and they were going to reclaim their power. They came back to kind of a surprise. When they came back to find that the person they had put in charge, Italiano, had fled to Mexico. He was just like, bye. So the only person in the city who had power at that point was Jimmy Lumia, and Santo Sr. promptly killed him after finding out that he had been bad-mouthing him while he was in Cuba. Trafficante Sr. was a kind of a ruthless man. So, of course, that put Trafficante back into operations, and he took right back over, and he ruled the city. He actually even completely eliminated Charlie Wall in 1953 after Wall had tried to kill Santo Jr. Santo Jr. survived the attempt and remained in the organization, where he actually ended up taking over the next year in 1954 when Santo Trafficante Sr. passed away naturally. So now it is Junior's turn to take over. Now, Santo Trafficante Jr. was actually born in the United States in 1914, and he was one of 5 sons of the mafia boss. Santo Jr. was a Tampa native, and he knew the city very well. And that kind of gave him an advantage over a lot of other people. He had dropped out of high school in 10th grade to help run the family businesses, and he actually owned legitimate, successful businesses. He owned several legal casinos in Cuba, a Havana drive-in movie theater, owned several shares in Tampa restaurants, bars, and nightclubs. But he was also rumored to have his hand in several Cuban hotels and casinos that were run by the mafia. Now, Junior was so powerful that he was even invited to the Havana Conference in December of 1946. The Havana Conference was actually historic. It was a historic meeting between the United States Mafia and the La Cosa Nostra leaders in Cuba. The conference was held to discuss business, mob policies, and rules. Because even mobsters have rules, y'all. So, it was important if he was attending to set rules for other mobsters. And he was important if he was basically invited to attend. Now, Trafficante Jr. was, he kind of went between Tampa and Cuba when he took over his father's organization because, of course, he had businesses in both places. And he continued to run both, but his main area was in Tampa out of Ybor City. He would travel back and forth for work and work both of the organizations that would profit his own interest. And he actually continued to work in Cuba until he was expelled by Fidel Castro, because Castro basically took his businesses from him. He was expelled by Castro for being an undesirable alien. Now, just remember that that's Fidel Castro that we're talking about, kicked out Santo Trafficante Jr. for being an undesirable alien. Let that one sink in. So, Trafficante came back to Tampa and stayed in Tampa and ran his legitimate and illegitimate businesses. And he actually came in contact with various U.S. operatives. And he was actually involved in a couple of unsuccessful attempts to assassinate Castro. In 1975, a CIA declassified report stated that Trafficante had been pursued to poison Castro. And Trafficante declined to help at the time. But it was later confirmed that Trafficante was in on some of the plots to get rid of Castro because, well, this is the one time that the U.S. government and the mafia had a common enemy, and they all wanted him gone. Weirdly enough, Trafficante was also linked to a JFK conspiracy allegation. It was said that Trafficante didn't care for the Kennedys and even said that Kennedy would be taken out before he could get reelected. Trafficante actually said this loud enough where people took him seriously, and he was actually called to testify because of an investigation trying to link Lee Harvey Oswald and the anti-Castro Cubans. He did testify in court, but the link was never established. The idea that Trafficante Jr. is linked still exists in a lot of conspiracy theories, and actually in proof. His former attorney is one of those leading people, and even a possible deathbed confession from Trafficante Jr. about the assassination, saying that the shooter had taken out the wrong Kennedy. Apparently, they were trying to take out Robert Kennedy instead of John Kennedy, but either way, there is a link to the Kennedy assassination, which I find really crazy and interesting at the same time. Now, of course, Trafficante Jr. didn't just stick to Florida. He traveled all over, especially when he would have to meet with other mob bosses. But he did live a long, long life. After being called to court about various things, he actually was only convicted once, but it was actually overturned, so he never served any time for it. He even had links to Donnie Brasco, which, if you remember, was an undercover FBI agent. Johnny Depp was in that movie. It was actually a good movie. But Trafficante was linked to the real Donnie Brasco and the FBI. Trafficante did live a good life, but it did finally catch up to him. He did die at the age of 72 in Houston at the Texas Heart Institute. He was waiting on a surgery, and he did not make it. His wife, though, however, lived a really long life. His wife, Josephine, died at the age of 95 in 2015 in Tampa. And he actually still has 2 daughters living. Now, of course, the family sold the Tampa mansion in 2016, and it was a gorgeous mansion. It sold for almost $1 million. If you Google it, you can see it. I'll post it on the internet or the Instagram pictures and Facebook so you guys can get a live. Sorry, my soundbar's crazy. You guys can get a look at just how extravagant this guy lived and how much money he made off of his illegal gambling. His family did not want the mansion, and they didn't care about a lot of his possessions. They wanted rid of them, so they were actually auctioned off in St. Pete in 2016 as well. Trafficante Jr. ruled Tampa with an iron fist during his time as the leader. In the 1950s, he maintained a narcotic. He apparently was neurotic, but he maintained a narcotic trafficking network with Tommy Luchis? Sure. I'm not good at these Italian names.
Luchis.
Yeah, there we go. See? Somebody help me. A mob boss from New York that was actually a family friend. He had known Tommy since he was younger, and they had grown up together, and so he considered him a family friend. But they maintained a narcotic trafficking network together, and that's actually when he would go to New York, was to meet with him a lot and to talk about shipments and do business and, of course, hang out as friends. Now, of course, the death of Trafficante Jr. meant that there was a lot of changes. So, a lot of things changed while Trafficante was still living, but when he died in 1987, it kind of created a huge power vacuum. And in 1987, Vincent Lo Scalzo became the boss of the Trafficante family, and Florida was open territory. The 5 families of New York City could now operate in any part of Florida. Nothing was off limits now that Trafficante Jr. was gone. Los Gazo controlled a much smaller family because over the years, as the members retired or died, they were never replaced. The family was never as big as it once was. And Los Gazo maintained control of illegal gambling, prostitution, narcotics, union racketing, hijacking, and of course, fencing stolen goods. He also controlled a few bars, restaurants, and nightclubs, as well as a couple liquor stores across Florida. He maintained ties to other families in California, New Jersey, New York, as well as the Sicilian Mafia. So, even though Trafficante Jr. passed, Los Gazo was dedicated to the family, and he was dedicated to keeping the business going, and of course, who doesn't want to make a lot of money? Unfortunately, though, on July 1st of 1989, Los Gazo was indicted on a racketeering charge. After having the charges dropped and reinstated, he finally pled no contest to receive 3 months of probation. So he still really didn't do any time. But of course, the family continued to have problems on and off. One of the last ones was Stephen Raffio and 18 members of the family were in Miami. They were the Miami faction of the Trafficante family. They were all arrested in the year 2000. And Stephen committed suicide in November of 2000. Nobody really knows why. Probably couldn't take it, or he knew he was going to be taken out. One or the other. Now, as of November 2007, Vincent Lascalo was in his 70s and semi-retired, which means he may have passed by now since this is 23. All the old families died out, and the Tampa Mafia has kind of fallen to the shadows of the New York Mafia. You can actually read about the Tampa Mafia in detail in the book Cigar City Mafia by Scott Deitch. We're going to go with Deitch. The family, however, is obviously gone, but its mark on Tampa is not forgotten, especially in Ybor City. I feel like Ybor has a lot of history and a lot of things that go in the shadows, but it's such an amazing place to hang out. I love Ybor City. I love roaming the streets and looking at the old, especially the Cuban Club, seeing all the social clubs that used to be that are now just wonderful, beautiful old buildings. The restaurants, the bars, the venues, and of course the chickens. I love the chickens and the roosters, just don't hit them. The city has remained Cigar City for all these years. You can still see all the old factories, and it's just such a cool place. If you're in Tampa, go down there. Go check out its old charm. Go check out old Tampa. I hope that you get to go. Just be sure to watch out for tourists. Ride the streetcars. Watch out for the chickens. Eat a Cuban at Carmine's. But of course, guys, you're going to have to watch out for Florida Man, because even Ybor is not off limits for Florida Man. Today's Florida Man comes to us from Escambia County, so up there in the Panhandle. Good old redneck Panhandle. He was accused of breaking into a woman's house and holding her hostage while he tried on baby clothes. I have a lot of questions. He broke into her house wearing a red and pink bra. No clue where he got the bra. With a camouflage vehicle headrest on his head. He then stole thousands of dollars. I'm sorry, guys, this one's hilarious to me. He then stole thousands of dollars in items, threatened to kill the woman, masturbated a little bit, and then left. Because, you got to get it all in there. He was later caught because he had left the camouflage headrest as evidence at her house. Buddy, drugs are a hell of a ride. Don't do them. Or if you do them, don't do them and don't turn into Florida Man. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed a little bit of true crime from Florida's past. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow. I don't want you guys to miss out on an episode. Again, if you have any suggestions, they're greatly appreciated. If you also have a second, I really would appreciate a 5-star review on Spotify or Apple. It kind of just helps get the podcast out to other people. Don't forget to check out the social media pages. Drink your water, wear your sunscreen, stay hydrated. And as always, guys, that's your daily dose of sunshine.